have to have
And if you
sponsor
Google
a few love
anything,
nests.
like,
Right.
if you Google
Fest,
school
I should
calendar,
say, fest.
it goes to the old links.
Oh, it's in the old website.
And it says page not found. Doesn't even go to the old website, just says page not found, because the old websites are gone.
Right.
They created a whole new link.
I'll share
Hey,
that.
how are you? Good to see you. Been a long time.
Take you all, we're getting you new ones.
Guess we're getting into negotiations.
Air conditioning,
We got some new ones.
All of
air
them.
conditioning systems, one, bleachers. What I remember reading,
Gotta get it done, and
Right.
it's, you know,
and it went
teaching
transfer.
scenario with different classes and subjects, and something where you might have a valid argument that her situation
That's why I don't pick the
is
market, I don't know what I'm doing.
nothing can be done
Oh.
until negotiations about it.
400
So
today, my gosh.
Yeah, I actually have to look up, I meant to look up.
It's 24,700.
About, hi there, come on, about whether or not, if I just hired a teacher, do they have to be observed and do the evaluation? I thought there was a cutoff date, but I don't remember it.
I'm not positive.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look
There's
it up.
definitely a certain amount of days, I gotta believe.
I just hired somebody. Yeah, do they have to do the PGP?
Yeah, if they didn't get a chance to set it up.
I'm not in the stock market, I don't, you know, I go on feel, and that's a bad way to go, so I just, you know, you
Yes, she
keep
is.
plugging along.
Where she has
The
landed.
volatility here has been, you know, I have friends in the market. and,
I did
you
not,
know,
but thank you very much. So where's this new high school being built anyway? You know?
Lake Worth and around Lyons Road and Lake Worth, I think.
Invest on, you know, over the long haul, we're all gonna be fine.
Yeah, Lyons and Lake Worth.
Yes.
They're building a lot of new homes and stuff, I think, yeah. We've owned that land for a long time.
Really?
Yeah,
There could be, no,
over 10 years, I think.
there could be a handful of applications for grants, but, you know, they're normally not time critical. The amount we get from the federal government on a direct basis is minuscule, so it's virtually no effect.
Two children playing.
Pardon me?
Two children playing. I don't get to give my speech, you don't get to ride the plane.
Yeah, I think so. Oh.
You'll have charge.
It's a light agenda.
Right, he's moving, yeah, he's moved. Okay.
Well, then she did a bad job of getting that story out there. It would have changed the narrative.
Send their luggage back to her.
We can get started, huh?
We can.
All right, we will get this meeting started so we can get out of here. It should be pretty quick. Want to do attendance?
Yes.
Around the horn?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, announce yourself and let's do attendance around the table, please.
Scott Singer, Boca Raton Mayor and League of Cities Representative.
George Elmore, committee member.
Sharon Schneiderman, PTA.
Salvatore Manueli, Cobra.
Ken Lassiter, Cork alternate.
Rick Miller, committee member.
Tim Sayre, representing Acreage Landowners Association.
David Porter, representing Construction Oversight and Review Committee.
Leanne Evans, School District Treasurer.
Mike Burke, CFO.
Eddie Rhodes, Vice President, Tri-City Education Committee, Glades.
David Dolan, Deputy Chief Facilities Manager with the school district.
Susan Atherley, Principal, Dreyfus School of the Arts, representing the principals.
Karen Brill, School Board District 3.
Justin Katz, President, Classroom Teachers Association.
Lori Vinicor, Alliance of Delray Residential Associations.
Radcliffe Brown, representing the TAC Committee. Blair Littlejohn from the Office of General Counsel.
Okay, do you want public?
Yes.
You announce yourselves?
Yeah, Dave Wilhelm, IT Director.
Okay, that's it. All right, thank you. All right, we have any public comments? Seeing none? Leanne, on to you.
Okay, I think we'll do the minutes and make sure those are acceptable to everyone.
Anyone have issues on minutes? Seeing none, minutes are accepted.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. This is not our regularly scheduled meeting. We have a couple of items, including one we'll be going to the school board next week. So we want to make sure you're seeing those as they come up. We will try our best to keep to the 4 quarterly meetings that are scheduled in advance, but there may be times where we need to schedule an extra meeting. And if it's okay, I'll send something out similar to what we did this time. I sent that Doodle website out where you could click and choose your preference. If that's okay with everyone, that'll be the plan going forward. And again, we'll try not to do that, but with the types of projects that we're doing, there will be changes and things we'll need to bring to your attention. So thank you all very much. And we had badges for some of you. We're trying to get all the badges updated. So after the meeting, if you still need an updated badge, if you could see me or Brenda Giampetti, who is over there by the door, between the two of us, we'll make sure if we don't have a picture for you, we'll get a picture for you. We have to provide that to school police so they can create the badge. So we'll make sure we get those all up to date before we leave today. And then the next thing I wanted to show you very quickly before we get into the agenda item is just how to get to the committee website. And there's a couple of different ways to do that because we have a new website. If you haven't looked, the school district updated the website over our winter break. The quickest way to get there is to just click on the school board and then on board advisory committees. And then each of the committees are listed. So you'll just scroll down to the Independent Sales Surtax Oversight Committee and click on the name. And it brings it right into the website. And this is where I'm loading all the documents. They're also on board docs, but sometimes it's easier to use the website, and it's available for the public. So I just wanted to walk you through that. When I send a meeting notice out to remind you of a meeting, I always send the link, so you can just click within the email. But if you need it in the interim, this is how you get to it. Okay, and then I want to jump right into the presentation. So we're going to start with, let's see if I can get to the next page, just the general update. The receipts continue to be ahead of projections. We're at 113% of projections, and this is receipts through December 31st. We're at collected so far 18% of what we expect to get over the 10 years. So again, we have a long way to go on this. Expenditures and interest earnings are through November. Our December month end closed yesterday, so it wasn't possible for me to get that already for you, but we'll have that for you at the March meeting. But through November, sales tax expenditures were at $74,000. I've added in the amount of open purchase orders just to give you an idea of the contracts that are out there and pending, and we're just waiting for either the work to be done or the flat panels to be delivered, or I know we just received another pile of school buses. I'm not sure if it's not a pile. We received a whole bunch of school buses that came in, and we'll be paying those bills shortly. And interest earnings continue to grow, and as interest rates rise, we're certainly going to take advantage of that to be able to increase interest earnings. So one of the things I wanted to go over was an update on borrowing, and there's 2 types of borrowings. And you have short-term, which we've always said we'll do for the sales tax. So in a given year, if we expect that we're going to spend $150 million on projects, but we're only bringing in $100 million, and I'm giving you rough numbers, $100 million of revenues, we might need to do some short-term borrowing. And it would be, we borrow, and as soon as the money comes in, we pay it off. So it doesn't have a defined end date. It's really just interim financing. And we will be most likely doing that. I'm expecting we'll do it sometime this year, and I'm hoping to bring it to you at the March meeting. We may push it back. I'm going to push that back and only do that borrowing when we need to do it. But it is on the list of things that we'll talk about this year. And then long-term borrowing is when you look at your referendum project list, and I think we put a copy of it in your package in case you're curious. But yeah, I always think of it as a 2-sided document. So one side lists all the projects to be funded from sales tax, and the other side lists the ones that are funded from other sources. And on that page of other sources, it's the major construction projects. We're going to borrow for those and pay them off over a 25-year period. Our finance committee gets very involved in the structure of those transactions. So we're planning to do that this year. We had planned to do a COPS issue to fund the replacement of Verity, Washington, and Delray Full Service. Now, decisions are still pending on exactly how we're going to build Washington and Delray Full Service, what's going to be in the project, how we're going to structure them. So we don't really want to borrow for just one school. And that one school for Verity, most of the work is not starting until next fiscal year. So I'd like to postpone that long-term borrowing. So we do need some money there to get started on Verity. And I'm expecting we're going to spend about $5 million, maybe a little more than that this year. So we have the option to do what we do for grants on a regular basis. If a grant is funded in the current year, but we don't get the money back because they're always done on a reimbursement basis, then we do what's called an inter-fund transfer. We're just on the financial statements, we're showing that money was transferred from one fund to another to cover costs until the grant money comes in. And we're treating the COPS issue the same way. So this debt issue, instead of doing it in this fiscal year, we're going to push it into next fiscal year. So delay it a few months. And the thought is to be able to say, since all these projects that we're looking at, Verdi, Washington, are on the referendum list, on the books, we're going to say the COPS issue is borrowing from the sales tax just until the COPS issue is issued, and then once it's done, the transfer will go away. Technically, money's not being moved. It's just being a paper transaction on the financial statements. And I've been advised, we didn't really need to even bring this in. It's really just a technicality for the financial statements, but we're talking about sales tax. And in the efforts of being completely transparent, I wanted the committee to understand what we're doing. So we're postponing the long-term borrowing a few months. And on the books, we're going to show some money from sales tax being used to fund these projects that are on the referendum list. And in 2 or 3 months, the transaction's reversed. So I want to make sure the committee is comfortable. There's an item going to the school board next week. This is when I get technical, and I apologize. I just don't know how else to explain it. There is a reimbursement agreement which has been approved by the Finance Committee, and it basically gives us the authority to go ahead and spend money on projects that will be funded by this long-term COPS issue. The board is then going on the record saying, yes, we understand we are obligated to do a debt issue at some point to pay for these, and we'll need to reimburse ourselves. So that item is going to the board on Wednesday, and in the agenda item, I also explain this same concept of doing an inter-fund transfer with the sales tax. So I wanted to make sure the committee gets to see this before the school board sees it on Wednesday. And if there's any concerns or questions, I'd like to answer them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is there any interest earned?
Well, the money is actually staying in the sales tax fund all along, so
Okay,
it will
so the-
continue to earn interest. The COPS fund will actually be charged interest.
Oh, I see, the COPS fund.
The COPS fund will actually be charged interest. So when we borrow, one of the things we'll have to reimburse ourselves for that interest earning. So it will not negatively impact the sales tax in any way. And I'm going to add this on to the sales tax report so you can see the amount that's outstanding and make sure that you're getting an update on it at each meeting.
Through the chair.
With COPS, it's through some type of a lending institution?
When we do a COPS issue, we're actually going out and working with a team of underwriters, and they're Wall Street bankers, and they're going to go out and borrow the money. They're going to go out and issue, think of it like bonds, except they're not bonds. They're more like a mortgage. There's a ground lease on the property that we're leasing, that we're borrowing against. But we'll go, and I think the next rotation on our underwriters is Bank of America Merrill Lynch takes the lead on this one. I'll have to go back and double check, but there'll be a team of 6 underwriters that are working to sell those bonds. We have a bond counsel and a financial advisor. One of the reasons we don't want to do a borrowing just for one project is there are costs associated with it. We'll have to go to Moody's and Fitch and get credit ratings, and that's a flat fee, whether it's one project or 10. So we want to be able to spread those costs across multiple projects. So the same with bond counsel, financial advisor, and before we actually do the transaction, the Finance Committee will be approving it, and the board will be approving the debt issue as well.
Do you have to notify the COPS people you're getting the money from that some of the money's just being reimbursed?
Well, that's what the reimbursement agreement is about.
Okay.
That's going to the board, and it's really, when the board looks at it, it's a 2-page document. It's very simple and straightforward, and it's just really for tax purposes as opposed to the investors. When we get ready to borrow and we list the things we're borrowing for, we'll list each of the projects, and we'll also indicate interest expense and interest earnings is normal with these. It's pretty standard. It happens on every one.
You have a question?
Through the chair.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask the dumb questions, okay?
There are no dumb questions.
Okay, so we're going to take an inter-fund transfer. The money's going to, actually is school board money. We're going to transfer the right to use that money to another portion of the school board. The money we're transferring is money that was collected from the public as a tax. Then when they finally need a larger sum of money, we're going to pay that back, but we're going to charge interest on the money that we've already taxed people on, which is going to be a tax on the people.
No.
Who pays the tax, who pays the interest, the state or the
No.
or the county?
The group that pays the interest, the school district operates on a fund basis, and every fund is entitled to interest earnings and interest expense. So in a given month, and the perfect example is the property taxes that are levied every year in December. And money comes in, you pay your property taxes in November and December. We're actually spending that starting in July and August. So for accounting purposes, interest expense is charged to that fund. And then once the money comes in, it starts earning interest. So at the end of the year, that fund has actually earned interest. It just pays interest for the first few months. So every fund is either earning interest or charged interest. And then we true it up at the end of the fiscal year. And so we've never had a fund actually go to the point where they're charged interest at the end of the year. It doesn't happen. It gets resolved over the course of the fiscal year.
The taxpayers aren't paying the money. The
No,
money's
they're not.
invested in its
No, we're
fund.
not going to be billing anyone.
It's generating the interest.
Right, it's the
Well, who
investment.
gets the interest is a question, and we retain.
So my real question is, in the interfund transfer, the money that's transferred on paper to the COP temporarily, where does that interest come from?
It's going to be offset by interest earnings that will happen in the next couple of months. Once we
So-
borrow, we'll borrow $150 million and start paying bills. The projects aren't done for 2 years, so that cash is sitting there and earning interest.
Okay, thank you.
The other question I've got, when you budget for all the projects with the COPS and the interest you're going to be paying for those, is that interest charge factored into the overall project cost?
No, it's not. When we borrow for COPS issue, there's actually a separate line item for principal and interest payments for making the debt service payments, and it's in a separate part of the budget.
Okay.
It doesn't get charged back to the individual construction projects.
So regular school board funds pays for that interest?
Right, we actually budget it in advance.
Okay, into the major overall school budget
Right.
for the year?
When you look at the capital plan, there's a portion for new schools, for modernizations, additions, for maintenance, and there's a portion for debt service, because we have to make principal and interest payments on the money that we borrow.
Right. Towards the end of the last sales tax referendum, we were out of COPS room because we had spent what we were allowed to spend on COPS. I assume that we've paid down the debt dramatically to the point that we can now do COPS again.
Exactly, and the reason that we had that problem last time was not, we were borrowing, but at the same time, the legislature came in and reduced our borrowing capacity by 25%. So we have not done any new money COPS issues since 2010, which was the Q-skip. So we have not done any borrowings for 8 years, almost 9 years.
And we budget enough to really pay that debt
Yes.
down? Oh, okay, good.
At the next meet, when we do the capital plan, there's a stand, in our presentation, I normally show the borrowing capacity and where we're at. That's a standard in our documents. The board sees it, and every time I say it's my favorite page, and they all kind of chuckle at me. But I do the interest in borrowing and the debt for the district, so it's something that I monitor very closely. So when we bring the capital plan to you, and I'm expecting we're going to do that in May, we'll have it ready by then. We'll bring that, and when I do that presentation, you'll see the portion that belongs to debt service.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, continue.
Okay.
I think I got it. Don't ask me to explain it, though.
I had to have it explained.
Okay, so this is the summary that you saw at the last meeting. The large 11 by 17 report that I do quarterly, I couldn't update that yet because we just closed December yesterday. So this is still as of September 30th. At the next meeting, you'll see that. But we do have some proposed plan modifications that we're going to go over today, number 18, 19, and 20. So as a summary of these, we're looking at facility renewal projects. And going back a few months ago, you remember we managed the facility renewal projects by what we call program, the air conditioning, the roofing, the bleachers compliance. And we met with you and said we're going to switch this to where it's school by school. So when it was by program, if we needed to move up one roof and shift another one back, we had the flexibility to do that easily. Now that we're doing school by school, if we're moving something up, we need to bring that into you. It's not something that we can just move around. We can move within a project, within a school. But if we need to move something up, we need to bring that to you. So that's what's happening here. We have a couple of them, and I'd love to say that this won't happen very often, but it will. You're going to see some of these most likely frequently throughout the whole process, because we had planned to build, for example, we planned to replace the roof in 2023, and it's deteriorating faster than we expected, and we need to move it forward. So that's what these three proposed plan modifications are all about. So I'm going to flip over to the next another slide, and you have this in your package. But these are, yes.
I wanted to just add something to what Leanne was saying about the school-by-school budgeting now. It came up at Cork yesterday and was clarified. So if one school was budgeted for $2.5 million worth of work, if something comes in a little higher, the roof comes in higher, and ceiling tile comes in lower, there's a plus and minus to the point that all the money that might get credited on something that came in lower for that school stays with that school. Doesn't just get dumped back into the general fund. So it pretty much should guarantee that everything the public was told that was going to happen, from roofs to floors to air conditioning, will get done at those schools. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only way that wouldn't happen is if all of a sudden we need $3.5 million for a school that we budgeted $2.5 million for. At that point, the scope will be driven by the budget. So it means that, okay, we're coming in $1 million more we need for that school, and we don't have it. So it means we cut the scope back for what was supposed to get done at that school, so that school still remains on that budget. Correct, Dave?
That is correct.
Okay.
There's also, when you look at the big report, there's a line item for sales tax reserve, and if you remember, there was $51 million there. That $51 million is still there. It's planned to be spread across all the years, and we use that, and you'll see it here, to manage timing differences, but we haven't actually used any of that funds. So if we have a project that comes in $1 million over, and the total school is really $1 million over, one of the things that will come to this committee is a decision: are we going to reduce scope, or are we going to start touching and getting into that reserve? And Dave and Wanda and I have all talked and said, I'm going to push back and say, please don't use that reserve until we have no other choice, because that reserve is also there in case we don't collect the full $1.3 billion of sales tax. So and staff will go back and forth on that. If we come to you with a request, that's something that we will have discussed at length before we bring it to you, and we're not there yet.
Leanne, how often are you going to be updating the board on the order of the projects and things that get moved around due to need?
I think we'll be doing that through the 5-year plan process, because we have 3 that we're bringing to you today, and we're already into January, and these are the first 3 we've had. I don't think we're going to have that many per year. If we end up with more, we can bring it, and that's something that the board needs to see that more often. One of the things at the last thing on the agenda today, which is not on the agenda, but I'm going to ask, we need to do an annual report for the school board. So Mr. Porter and I were talking about how to develop that. So that could be included in that annual report as well.
And just as a follow-up, I tend not to be district-centric. So my concern is a school in Mr. Barbieri's area, which is Olympic Heights, which their HVAC has been a horrific problem, and I know they were lower down on the list. So it would be helpful, I think, for the board to see a list sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And if I may, the order of the schools in general will not change. So if Olympic Heights was scheduled for a much later time, generally, we're not proposing to bring the entire school forward to now. We're only focusing on those areas that need it, as you mentioned, the HVAC. Right. So these issues that we're discussing are a small portion of the overall budget for a school that we might be coming forward with. And again, as Leanne mentioned, over the course of time, it could be any number of things at any school over the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Right.
Excuse me.
Mr. Rhodes.
I noticed in the last 5, 6 months, the construction materials have went up tremendously. Mm-hmm. With our budgeting, are that budgeted in that we won't have to go back and redo some of our?
The original budgets had an inflation factor to them. Whether we go over what that percentage was calculated, only time will tell. But that's the reason that this committee exists too. I was on the first sales tax committee, and we had 185 of these modifications over 5 years. Most of that was driven because of inflation with construction.
This is one time when it went up astronomically. I mean, out of the roof. I was just surprised.
Well, we had like elementary schools that were budgeted at like 28 million, and when the GMPs came in, there were 34 million. So
Yeah,
you can't
what I'm
budget for that, but that's where this committee then said, okay, here's what we're going to do to shift stuff around to still give the public what they were told they were going to get.
Yeah, I met with some of the contractors during the glaze, and just one thing they was complaining about materials. They had set in a bid that didn't, none of the materials, they went up so high, they want to come back and renegotiate, but however, kind of locked in, so I was just wondering.
Well, and that's where we even get into national
Okay.
stuff like tariffs,
Gotcha.
because aluminum and steel has skyrocketed in price
Yeah,
and
it is.
availability.
That's our scary part.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I comment
Thank
on
you.
that also? It seems to me that the notion that you're not going to hit the reserves and that you're going to cut back on a school project is really distinct from the referendum, because I think those projects were listed not by dollars, were they, in the referendum? They're just listed.
They were just listed.
You want to get those projects done, and you want to get them done adequately. And so I think it's important that, rather than necessarily just get an axe out and chop a project down, is to get the project done right, and particularly if we're making more or bringing more money in. So I gather that you need to have some reserves for bad times, but, I'm not sure you need a 15% reserve.
And I think,
You need to get your projects done correctly.
I think one of
Right.
Leanne's concerns had been the fear that we end up with the schools at the end of the list, which may not have as many needs, because the ranking of the schools was based on their facility assessment. But the hope and the expectation is that those schools at the end don't suffer because they're in better shape, that, they may only need $3 million, that they get nothing. That's not an acceptable approach
Well,
for
we
us.
get that. I think you have a couple
Right.
reserves there.
Well, we have some reserves, and we're coming in ahead of schedule with sales tax revenues, but over a 10-year window, I expect we're going to have some type of economic downturn. And so while we're coming in well ahead of budget now, 2 years from now, we could be well below budget. So we've got to keep the long-term in mind. So far, we aren't ready to come to you with any projects where we're cutting things out. We're able to do everything so far. It is something we'll monitor, and when we get to that point, hopefully in advance of awarding contracts, but it's something we're talking about, how exactly we're going to deal with those. If we get to the point where there's not enough money in a school to complete the project, and that's a discussion that will happen with the board as well, because to go to the reserves and I'm going to use an example, in year 5, they were tapping out and using the reserves to complete projects. What happens with the projects that are at the end? And we need to be fair to all the schools,
Well, I
so.
think you need to be fair, but there are other ways of funding that. I don't necessarily think that you have to. You got to complete the project.
Last time, the project construction prices went up dramatically. And those projects were all schools. We were building schools or replacing schools. So we switched a lot of them into COPS issues and we borrowed
That's what
to
I
build
mean.
the schools. You can't always borrow for the type of schools we're doing. We can't do a 25-year financing for a 10-year roof. But we will be looking at all options. And there may be some projects within that we could borrow. For school buses, we could do a lease and use other funds. So we'll be looking at it holistically. This will happen as part of our capital planning process, and we'll be reviewing it, looking at everything that's out there we need to do.
I think it just seemed too static to me and not having the necessary flexibility to get where you need to be, and that is funding your projects adequately.
Right. Yeah, we aren't coming to you today changing scope of any projects. What we're doing today is changing the timing of some pieces. So I'm going to start really just to explain the format, and then I'm going to let Dave talk about what exactly we're doing, why we're doing things. These projects are a little different than what we've seen before, in that what we're doing is this is Banyan Creek, we're moving up money into Banyan Creek, we're adding $400,000 into FY19 and taking $400,000 out of FY22, and we're running it through the deduct to the sales tax reserve in 19 and then increasing sales tax reserve in 22. So that report that you see that's on legal paper, the total budget for Banyan Creek is not changing at all. So if we were just to give you the normal report, you wouldn't even know this was happening. But we want to make sure that you're seeing the things that we're moving up and back. So we're trying to give you a lot of detail in this particular format so you can see that we're moving something up and then we'll reduce the budget in future years because we're just moving a piece of the project up.
I have a question, because I noticed this is for HVAC. I happen to know two of the schools in here. When you fix the HVAC system, and you do all the work you have to do for HVAC system, and then are you doing any shell work? Will that stuff then be antiquated or not used when you fund the rest of a project? So
This is when I'm going to switch you over to Dave and let him answer the questions.
Forgive me, I'm not quite following.
So you're doing you have a house, and you're replacing your HVAC, but then you decide to knock down part of your house and put on a new addition. Well, that's kind of where I'm getting at. When you're doing the HVAC ahead of the bigger project, are you then putting in money that will then putting in stuff that you're going to be taking out later?
No, absolutely not. We're very cognizant of those pieces that we're working on that could be affected by, in the future as well. We've got a lot of other things. There's what's called CSIRs that we're worried about. Well, they've got to be taken care of. These are violations, ADA compliance violations. But we want to make sure we're doing them in a smart way. Same thing with air conditioning. We don't want to put something in above ceiling that going to turn out we're going to rip the ceiling down later and have it redone completely. So we're very cognizant of that. So we're planning our work accordingly, but also keeping them. This particular one, we're talking about an HVAC system that's failing. And it's not the whole system, but it is a portion of it that needs to be replaced irrespective of timing.
A lot of times with air conditioners, they're replacing the main unit that's like at your house, they're replacing that unit that's sitting outside. They're not touching any of this stuff inside the house. So it depends on each project, it's different. But in most of the cases with air conditioners right now, we're replacing those chiller units, which is comparable to that unit that's sitting outside your house. So they just take one out and plug the new one in. They just cost a lot of money because it's covering a big building.
And that's where all the staff working with AECom is going through all of those different bits and pieces. For instance, if there's electrical problems associated with the air conditioning, they're fixing the electrical at the same time so that they're not having to go back and then fix the electric later that's already connected with the AC system fix-up.
Good idea.
Yeah, and we're making decisions, as Mr. Porter mentions. Many of the campuses have several buildings. So if this particular case, it's on one building that we're focusing on, we're trying to evaluate, is it worth it to disrupt the entire school and do the entire process now? Or is it something that they can be operated separately? We'll fix the critical air conditioning problem now, and then 2 years from now, we'll come in and tweak the rest of the stuff.
Okay, thank you.
That's something we've done on this particular one.
Okay, are there any questions on the process? We've kind of talked about Banyan Creek a lot with the air conditioners. Are there any questions on this one? Okay, I'm going to move to the next one then. I'm just going to let Dave talk through the scope of what we're doing. So this is for Forest Hill High School.
Forest Hill High School bleachers. They had been in disrepair for some time, and they've gotten to the point where we absolutely needed to replace them immediately. And I think the number on what year was 24, 25. So this was something that could not wait. Absolutely had to be replaced now. We had money in the budget for it, but we had only moved up, had capitalized last year. What was it?
It was 1.2 million.
1.2, and we needed an extra $400,000. We just underestimated how much we thought we were going to need to pull forward for it. So this was just a simple combination of last year's budgeting for it and moving this year's money up to cover the full price.
And again, the total budget's not changing. We're just moving some money up from 24 and 25 into this year.
Quick question. The bleachers, I'm familiar kind of with that school. Is it because of disrepair or not repairs that weren't made, or is it vandalism or a combination of all?
I can't speak to the vandalism. I know there has been some, but I don't know if it actually had any long-term impact on it. It was, in fact, just disrepair, lack of age, lack of opportunities. That's what the referendum was really about, was getting into things where we didn't have a chance previously.
They're just a little too rusted to be safe.
Thank you. Age.
Are there any other questions on Forest Hill High School? Okay, then we're going to go to the next school, which is Spanish River High School, and I think this is air conditioning and other work.
And other work, yeah. The air conditioning is in Building 8,000. You may have heard it's been a point of discussion at several board meetings as well. And it's a service that needs to be done immediately. It's in really bad condition. The rest of the school, again, all the other buildings will have AC updates when that when that school's referendum money comes available. But this is critical at this point in time. Absolutely can't be, we're working on it this summer. It's going to be taken care of this summer. And in addition to that, we also are moving up $1.23 million because Spanish River is actually scheduled, or in the original schedule, the prioritization, it was set up as a 2020 school. So we needed to bring the money forward to hire the designer, hire the CM contractor, because they help us in the design stage to make sure we value engineer everything, use our money wisely.
So again, the project is not changing. The total amount for each project is staying the same. We're just advancing some money from 20 into 19.
Dave, is this being done by maintenance like a lot of our AC, or is this one actually going out to a contractor?
This particular one is being done by maintenance, yes.
Okay.
One of our guys, Dan Hughes, is a sharp HVAC guy, and we're working with Train on this one.
And that is what staff's been doing a lot with the AC work, is we're not necessarily going out to third-party contractors. The maintenance department has kind of stepped up and had the ability and the knowledge, and they're working with the major manufacturers, and they're doing the work.
Are there savings from that comes from that? Savings?
Not significant, but enough that I didn't want to have to pay for an engineer to design something that one of my guys really had a good handle on. And that money, as mentioned earlier, stays within the school, so now it will be available for something else within that school, whether it's the fire alarm or et cetera.
Well, and even if there wasn't savings, as an architect, I would love to have one-point responsibility, and so now if the maintenance guys are doing the fix-up work, there's no contractor to blame for an error when all of a sudden the maintenance guys has to go in and fix what the contractor did wrong.
So if they don't spend that,
Okay, are there any other questions on Spanish River?
they could use somewhere else in the school.
Okay, so before we, and that's really the last item, but I did want to give you a heads up. We have a couple more of these that will be coming to you. We had some good news in the Department of Education. They approved the construction of 03000 and 05C recently. And we've worked with the city of Boca Raton. I want to make sure I thank Mr. Singer, as the mayor of the city of Boca, helping us to get the land so that we can move forward with Verdi and the construction project that's coming. So there'll be another change coming to move some money up for those two projects as well. We didn't have, I have a number on one of them now. I didn't have it when we wrote this, and there's one more coming. So when we come together in March, we'll have some other items that are going to be bringing money up for those two projects, and I'm sure we'll have others at each meeting where we're moving things around.
Do we need a vote on these three?
Yes.
Okay. I need a motion to approve all three of these items.
I'll motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Okay, and I have one very quick question.
I've got a question,
Based on the county ordinance, it's not in your policy, and I'm going to add it into the committee policy, but the ordinance requires that we do an annual report on the sales tax. So I'd like to ask if it's okay for me to work directly with your chair to develop that annual report, and we can bring it back to you for review at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Good.
Very good.
Question I've got, it goes back to kind of our contingency fund. It's probably, the answer's probably no, but can we budget in the school budget $2 million a year to continue adding to the contingency fund to cover if 51 million doesn't cut it for what we have to have at the end?
There's a reserve. The reserve we're talking about is the one within the sales tax that was actually part of the referendum. The district also has a capital, we call it capital contingency, that's not sales tax, but it's a reserve for other emergency items. And that is in the capital plan, and it's something that we'll look at as part of the capital planning process to see if we need to look to increase that. I know that coming up for this coming year, there's a lot of pressure to increase budgets for things like computers that need to be replaced desperately, air conditioners, more and more of those need to be replaced. That's on the list of things we're looking at to see if we can set some more money aside. In our current capital plan, we do dramatically increase the reserves, but not until years 8, 9, and 10. And of course, what happens in year 8, 9, and 10, lots of things will change between now and then. So that's something we can certainly look at to see if we can start setting other monies aside.
And Dave, a question for you, I guess. With all the improvements we're doing to each school, are we then also setting up a future maintenance schedule so that we will know when that new roof is going to need replacement and to then be able to budget in advance for that?
Yes, in fact, we are, and we're even using software to try to track it. Our maintenance work order type of software, it's a CAFM type of software, is every new project that we implement, that information is being recorded inside that system, which then triggers regular maintenance schedules, warranty information, when the warranties are expiring, those kinds of things. Really giving the handshake between the construction side and the maintenance side, that there's a clear path over of all those activities. Yes, in fact, there is a detailed working relationship there.
Good. Okay, anything else by anyone?
Yeah, question. I've got a question. I understand there's some litigation about the use of the sales tax. Charter schools are entering. Blair, do you have any comment on that or where that stands?
There is a lawsuit that's been filed. As far as I know, we still haven't been served, but we've pulled it out of the court records. And, yeah, you know, we have, what we did in accordance with opinion we got from outside counsel. We think we have a strong case and that their case is meritless.
Wasn't
this anticipated? Wasn't this expected?
Yes.
Okay, well, there it is, and got to deal with it now.
Okay, anything else?
The next meeting is scheduled for March 8th
Yep.
at 9:30. I sent calendar items out to you for the rest of the year, so those are out there. Going forward, I'll continue letting you know, reminding you a week in advance and letting you know where the meeting materials are at. And I just want to remind you, if you don't have a current badge, if you could come see me or see Brenda before you leave, and we'll make sure that if we don't have a badge, we'll get one for you. And Mr. Littlejohn?
Yeah, just to be clear, the lawsuit is not about the sales tax, it's about the property tax referendum that was passed this past November.
Okay, the one that was for teachers.
For the operating budget.
Operating
Correct,
side.
operating
Okay.
That's right,
funds,
it's
not
different. It is a different
capital.
one.
Safety and
Right.
teachers.
Right, okay.
I gather that wouldn't affect us, though. Good.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.